Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a software developer by learning to develop yourself, your skills, your network, and more. I'm Brian, your host. A couple of days ago, a student at Parsity reached out to me. In fact, he's the second person to do so in the last week, and said they had an interview coming up. And I was like, whoa, they're barely into the program. They already have an interview, and they needed to know what to do next. And I wanted to share with you a little bit of advice, the non-technical interview advice that you're going to need as you hit the job market. Most people make the biggest mistake, which I made years ago, of not applying or trying to go out and search for interviews until they feel like they're ready, whatever that means. There's some magical moment in all of our heads where we're like ready for the interview finally. Let me clue you in here. That moment will never happen. You're never going to feel ready. I just did an interview myself, as a matter of fact. Don't tell anybody though, please. I did an interview for an engineering manager position, had a coding challenge, system design interview, and 6 other rounds of technical and behavioral assessment. Super, super long. I did enjoy it overall, and it taught me a lot about the interview process. And I do interviews at least 2 times a year just to stay fresh. And I've mentored dozens of other people through the interview process. I've helped people get their salaries up to like $30,000 more than they were getting. I've had increases of up to like $50,000 through interviewing. Interviewing is a really, really important and high leverage skill. I don't think it's fair that it's so important to know how to interview well, but it is. It is the quickest way to make a lot of money in tech, is to interview well, because you can do all the great work in the shadows, or you can be the best student at your boot camp or college or wherever. But if you can't interview well, you're not going to make it, and you're going to leave a ton of money on the table. But what might surprise you, especially if you're a junior developer or self-taught or a student at boot camp, like some of the people that reached out to me, is that your next interview might not be that technical at all. So I want to walk through a few things you can do to beat the non-technical interview, because there's a ton of information out there from me and other people about how to beat the technical portion of the interview. That's actually pretty learnable. There's a whole industry that's catered just to doing that. This is also why I think it's really important to go to a boot camp, a college, have a mentor, because as much as people say they want to do the self-taught route or go learn things on their own, I see that as a really good way to do it for some people. But when it comes to things like interviews, where the stakes are incredibly high, you have tens of thousands, sometimes over $100,000 worth of money on the table that is going to depend on the outcome of this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hour long interview process you're going to go into. Why leave it to chance? That's why at places like Parsity, we have a career coach, we have a dedicated mentor, we have people like me, soon to be my friend Zubin, that's going to come in the program, who actually got an offer at Google and was a software engineer at Google. This is what you ultimately pay for. You pay for the shortcut to nail these kinds of things in these high stakes moments, because there's a lot of money on the line. But because I'm a nice guy, I'm going to give you some advice for free based on the 50 or so interviews that I've done myself and the more than 100 other interviews that I've helped people out with. So here's what most developers do. They grind LeetCode, they're bumbling through Big O, they're polishing up some portfolio that no one's ever going to see, trying to get a different shade of green or something like that. They get an interview finally. Somehow they apply to a million companies, they use ChatGPT and just bombard every company in the tri-state area. They get on the phone with them and you talk with an engineering manager or some hiring manager or something like that. And they ask you, why do you want to work here? Tell me about a technical project you recently completed. What do you know about our company? Do you have any questions for me? And you just blurt out, I'd probably use a hash map to decrease the runtime complexity of that particular algorithm. And they just hang up the phone. And they're like, no, you didn't make it, brother. Here's what you should have done instead of grinding all those hours on LeetCode. Because LeetCode problems are for the top 5 to 10% of all companies out there, maybe the top 1% of all companies out there. That's Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, really high growth startups that are paying obscene amounts of money to people. Most of us don't work at these places. We work at places no one's ever heard of. Think about the company you currently work for. Has anybody heard of it? When you tell your friends and family where you work, do they know the company immediately? Or do you work for a small business, which makes up more than half of where all developers ultimately work, according to a Stack Overflow survey? So this is really important. You need to research the company ahead of time. I didn't do this. I got on the phone with the company kind of recently and they said, why do you want to work here? Tell me what you know about the company. And I was like, I don't know. Kind of embarrassing. Didn't lead to a great conversation. Didn't give me a great impression. And I would say the smaller the company, the more you need to know about it. And if you reached out to them, it's even more important. If they reach out to you, you can kind of say, well, you reached out to me. Why don't you tell me about the company, right? But if you reach out to them and you applied and then they call you back, you better darn well know something about the company. Go on Glassdoor, go on their About Us page, go on their LinkedIn page, of course. See if you can find their company values. See if you can find the person who's going to interview you and find something else about them that's not super creepy, right? So maybe you find out that your interviewer is a really big TypeScript enthusiast, or they're really active in some sort of community. Maybe you're part of the same community. Maybe you see that they've commented recently on a video you saw, or maybe you find their Twitter or something like that. Maybe they're active. This is a very slim chance that this is the case because most developers are not active on social media or anywhere else, despite what you might see on YouTube or other social media apps. Like most of us are just here to do our work, go home, and just scroll and troll. We're not here to write or offer anything else out to the community, despite all the stuff you see on social media. But if you can find them and you do have something in common, bring that up in a non-creepy way. Hey, I noticed that you're also in this particular community. So cool. I've actually been in that community for a while myself. I really like so-and-so. Maybe I'm part of Theo Brown's community, or maybe we're part of some Discord group with TypeScript or something like that. Like I said, oh, I didn't know you were also in this TypeScript group. Immediately, that gives you clout. It gives you some sort of credit. It makes you seem more likable and more likely that you could work on the team because that person sees some of themselves in you. At the bare minimum, know the company values and just parrot them back to people. A lot of times when you're interviewing somebody, that'll be something on the rubric you're supposed to check off. Like, how do they embody company values? And if they just say one of the company values, like, well, I really value grit and determination. And you're like, whoa, that's one of our company values. Checked off the box. And now you're one step closer to nailing the interview. Now, let me tell you the most common question you're going to get. Hey, I hope you're enjoying the show. Now, let me be clear. Learning how to code is not easy. It's even harder now with so much information about how you should be studying, what you should be learning, and the reality of the job market. Getting a job requires an entirely different skill set than just learning how to code, but you need both to succeed. At Parsity, we work with you one-on-one in a very small setting. We only take 60 people per year to coach them from zero through hired. The reality is, if you're a career changer, you need that personalization to help you with your individual problems, your local job market. And if you want to work directly with me and my team, go to parsity.io. If you want more information, just schedule a call directly with me by clicking the link in the show notes below. Now, back to the episode. The most common non-technical question you're ever going to get. Tell me about an interesting project you worked on and your role in it. You're going to get some variation of this question. I've gotten this question, I think, at literally every interview I've done in recent memory. I can't think of an interview where I haven't been asked this specific question. What they're looking for in here is, can I trust you? Have you worked on something that makes it sound like you're a trustworthy engineer? Does it sound like you could work here? Here's some very generic tips. Make it about you, not your team. So they're going to hire you, not your teammates, not the people you went to some boot camp with or your mentors, your instructors, whatever. Give some context about the project. You may know what Bacon Eggs API or some cute little name that you decided to name it is. They don't. You need to give them some context. What did you build? Why did you build it? Why is it important? Now, follow up with how would you improve it? For example, I built this API which goes out and crawls the web for open positions for software, which is how I found you actually. Now, my role on that was I was the full stack developer, meaning I not only architected the back end and the front end, but also the deployment process as well as the design. I'm not a great designer, so that's probably something I would go back and really change. It's a great interface for me to use, but if I wanted to share this with the world, it wouldn't be super intuitive. So that's a big flaw, I think, in my initial approach. They might be say, oh, cool. Well, how did you architect it? What was the back-end strategy? What was the databases you used? And you can kind of get into all these things. Don't be married to these ideas either. Say, I use NoSQL database. Why'd you use that? Well, because it was the only thing I knew at the time. But if I had to go back, I actually may change it to relational database because the data tends to be pretty normalized and fairly the same across the different pages I was crawling. So this can lead to interesting discussions. Also, have some questions ready for them at the end of the interview. There's nothing worse than you get a candidate in a room and you're like, I left 10 minutes left for discussion and for you to ask me questions. And you're waiting and trying to kill time for the next interviewer to come in or something like that. Are you waiting for the next Zoom meeting to start? You're saying, what questions do you have for me? And they sit there and say, nothing. Or worse, when do I get vacation? Or how much is the salary? Things that are like, terrible, terrible question. You'd be shocked how many people actually ask this kind of stuff. When do I get vacation? What's the time off policy? I I have a cat appointment next Friday. If I got hired by then, would I be able to take it off? And you're like, why would you ask that kind of question? Why don't you wait till you get an offer so you have some leverage and then you ask these ridiculous questions after we've already hired you and now it's too late to pull the plug on you, right? So you want to have some kind of questions. And this is another point where you can kind of turn the interview around where you get to have some power and you can do this psychological kind of game on people. You can kind of make yourself seem more important than maybe you feel like you are. So some of my favorite questions are, if there was one process you could change on this team, what would it be and why? This gives them the impression that one, this person cares. Two, they're thinking, what would I change on here? You've kind of flipped the power dynamic in the room at that point because you're asking them a pretty targeted question, which requires them to have some thought. You could also ask them, what do you like about working here? And what's another thing that you might change about working here if you had a magic wand? A good one to ask is, how would a person in this position stand out on the team? It makes them start thinking and they think, can I see this person doing that? Another kind of psychological trick, you could say. I don't want to say trick like you're really trying to do some weird manipulation on the person, but I do think it's important to think, how can I make them see me in a light that would make them want to give me an offer? That's what you're trying to do here. Remember, this is a game overall. You're being judged. You're sitting down. You're writing code in front of people, a totally abnormal experience, or you're being asked questions in a room and people are writing down things. This is abnormal. This is why interviews are high stakes, high pressure, and people tend to fail them a lot. I mean, you're going to fail more interviews than you're going to nail, right? Like you're going to fail most of your interviews, in fact, because once you get an offer, that's when people tend to stop interviewing. And the last question, this is my favorite one by far. What is your deployment process like? When you ask them, how do you deploy code from a person's machine out to the web? This forces them to reflect on what they do. It can open up some glaring holes in their process. It can also let you know how mature the company is, how tech focused they are. If they're like, well, we deploy, we FTP to some server, you print out your code in our printer, you hand it to Bob, Bob scans it, and then it goes in here and you're thinking, oh my God, do I really want to join this place or not? So this can be illuminating too, for sure. You can also maybe guard yourself against getting into a place where you have no desire to get into. You're like, oof, this sounds awful and archaic. And you can then ask, well, what's your on-call policy like? I'm just curious, how do you handle critical incidents? Another really good one, because this will let you know how their dev operations go, how they handle critical incidents. Is this something you're going to deal with? If they have so many critical incidents that they are on fire all the time, you have to really think, is this a place that I really want to go? Am I willing to accept this? So yeah, in conclusion, study all this non-technical stuff. My favorite places to go would be Glassdoor and teamblind.com. If you go on Glassdoor, the added benefit is that you can look up previously asked questions. Is this wrong? Is this right? Is this morally wrong or right? I don't know. All I know is that that's what I'm doing because I want to win the game. I'm not here to play the game for the sake of playing it all the time. Sometimes I do interview just to play the game to make sure I'm in interview shape because that's incredibly important. Can't really stress to you how important it is to be able to interview as a software developer because that is literally where you make all your money. Now, getting into the job, obviously, you can't just suck. But if you interview enough and you practice interviewing enough and you actually are studying and you are practicing problems, then you're probably going to do pretty well anyway. But at the very least, you're going to always be able to land on your feet if you do find yourself without a job. That's why interviewing is one of those things that there's a whole industry around nowadays, and there's probably more money in teaching people how to interview than teaching people how to code. Now, if you're interested in learning how to nail both of these things, you should just join Parsity. Happy to work with you. I love talking about interviews. I love helping people with the interview. And I also like teaching people how to code. It's just a fun thing to do. I love seeing people when they finally get an idea and it makes sense in their head. And I especially love when people get that first offer and we come back and we say, you know what? Time to negotiate. And then we ask for a little bit more, only if they're up for it, which they should be. Anyway, that's a whole other episode in itself, the art of negotiation, which is actually really simple. If you want me to do an episode on that, or maybe write a quick article on the art of negotiation, which is not as crazy as you may think it is. I learned how to negotiate well into my career. Finally, after years of not even knowing it was a thing, I just thought whatever they hand you is just what you accept. Big old wrong on that one, friend. Anyway, if you're interested in that kind of thing, let me know. And if you have suggestions or topics for an episode, please let me know. See you around. That'll do it for today's episode of the Develop Yourself podcast. If you're serious about switching careers and becoming a software developer and building complex software and want to work directly with me and my team, go to parsity.io. And if you want more information, feel free to schedule a chat by just clicking the link in the show notes. See you next week.